The Buffalo Bills offense wakes up, a new name emerges on defense, and Ken Dorsey opens up on the offense. We're breaking it all down today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy whatever day you are listening to this podcast, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. As a reminder, we are free and available to you on all platforms, including YouTube. Well, this will serve as the Thursday podcast for the week, but I'm going to drop it on Wednesday afternoon so that way I can get this information to you as quickly as possible. And I know so many of you like to say in the YouTube comments, Joe, it's not insert whatever day it is. Well, that's because I dropped the podcast a little early sometimes. Give me a little grace. All right. Anyways, with that out of the way, we're going to talk about and break down what we learned from day 4 of Buffalo Bills training camp. The practice was held on Wednesday, July 27th. And for those of you that have been waiting to hear good things about the offense, your wait is over. Collectively, no matter who you listen to or whose practice reports you read coming out of the Wednesday, July 27th practice, the offense had a phenomenal day. Let me read 3 different tweets to you that sums it up, right? Dan Feets. Josh Allen is having one of those days where he's putting the ball wherever he wants. Accuracy and ball placement exhibition on display during 11-on-11 red zone drills. John Scott. Josh Allen and the Bills offense dialed in all morning during extensive red zone work. Touchdown tosses galore. Fantastic response after overall poor showing at practice yesterday. Matt Bove. Yesterday, the defense had a dominant day. The offense has responded with a lethal performance. I lost track of how many touchdowns they scored. Folks, the Bills offense came alive, and not that it was ever really in doubt. And obviously, we want to hear a lot more about the Bills offense performing well. It was good to hear these reports. And so we'll dig into some of the specifics here in just a moment, but I wanted to kind of lead with that because, look, we're looking for a big sample size of information to respond to, but it's a bit discouraging yesterday hearing what came out of practice and finding out that Josh Allen was visibly frustrated. You start talking yourself into stuff like, man, they do have a lot of new pieces on the offense, and there's a lot of new coaches, and is this going to be a slow start? And the schedule at the beginning of the season is pretty tough. And you got to, play on the road against the Rams, the Super Bowl champions at week 1. Are the Bills going to have to climb out of an early season hole? Well, you certainly feel better about it from an offensive perspective based on the Wednesday practice. So let's get into some of the specifics. I do want to start with the participation because we had a new name here that didn't practice, and that's Ryan Bates. I have no idea why he didn't practice, but he didn't practice. Jamison Crowder and Jay Kumaro also didn't practice. So whatever that tightness is, for these guys, it's been going on a few days where they haven't been able to participate in practice. Daquan Jones got a veteran rest day. And then there's nothing new for Elianku, Roger Saffold, or Tre'Davious White. So with Ryan Bates not practicing, it opened up a new opportunity for the right guard position. And so from what I've been able to gather, the primary offensive line during first team work on Wednesday was left tackle Deion Dawkins, left guard Greg Manns, center Mitch Morse, right guard David Quessenberry, right tackle Tommy Doyle. Very interesting, right? Another new name in that left guard spot. It started off as Cody Ford, and then it was David Quessenberry, Now it's Greg Manns, and it's been Tommy Doyle, right? It's been like 4 different left guards in 4 days of practice. And then with Bates out, David Quessenberry goes to right guard. Tommy Doyle's the right tackle. So we continue to see Spencer Brown not get these opportunities at right tackle. And Ken Dorsey was asked a bit about this in his press conference about, look, what's behind this? Is it getting Spencer Brown acclimated? What is it about? Is it about combinations? And he said, yeah, it's a little bit of both, right? They're trying to get Spencer Brown up to speed, but also experiment with different combinations. And unfortunately, Roger Saffold's absence has really created a lot of opportunity here for this Bills offensive line to have a lot of different exposures to different groupings. And look, on one hand, that's a good thing. On the other hand, it's a bad thing. I fear that we're going to get pretty deep into training camp before the Bills' preferred starting offensive line has that time together, right? And we talk all the time about the offensive line being a situation where you have 5 guys working together as one unit. Well, you need time on task. You need an opportunity to gel together. When is that going to happen for this Bills offensive line? We're 4 days into this thing, and how many different combinations has there been? Again, somewhat of a good thing, also somewhat of a bad thing. And so I do hope that this stabilizes and that this offensive line will get time together before they have to face Aaron Donald in week 1 and Jeffrey Simmons in week 2 and Harold Landry in week 2 and Christian Wilkins and Emmanuel Ogbah and Melvin Ingram in week 3. It's the NFL, man. These teams have good defensive linemen. And you know how optimistic I am about this Bills offensive line, but I sure would like to see the starting 5 come together and get an opportunity to gel and get that time on task together. Some other notes here on the offense. Bobby Hart continues to struggle. Bobby Hart continues to struggle. And in other news, water is wet. Matt Marino commenting that AJ Epinesa and Boogie Basham had their way with him. Bobby Hart has a lot of experience, but you don't want him having to play for your team. I don't think he really has a path to this roster. Here's a new name. Matt Marino commented on Duke Johnson having a bigger role on Wednesday and said he looked good. Had some flashy runs. And, Duke Johnson's a guy that went from a player that you thought could have an opportunity to make some noise for the Bills. When you thought of this room as Devin Singletary, Duke Johnson, and Zach Moss, then the Bills draft James Cook, and you start to say, well, what's going to happen here with Duke Johnson? I've certainly put a lot of stock into last year for Duke Johnson, where the NFL told you they kind of moved on from Duke, where he was a street free agent for like almost the entire season. He winds up playing 4 games for the Dolphins, winds up playing pretty good. And I think that's kind of been the theme with Duke Johnson throughout his career, is that, hey, whenever he's gotten his chances, he's played pretty good, but he's never been an overly desired player in terms of different opportunities that you would expect for a player like him to have in free agency. A couple of years in a row now where, the NFL was not really telling us by wanting him to be part of the teams, right? Like if you're sitting around as a street free agent all the time, that says something about the way the NFL values you. And so I have low expectations for Duke Johnson, but I think he'd be a wonderful, wonderful practice squad stash. But it was nice to hear something. I don't think I've heard really anything about Duke Johnson to this point. Matt Marino also commented that Marquez Stevenson, the Bills' second-year wide receiver, had his best practice of camp, made some nice adjustments to some underthrown footballs, and made some tough catches. One more note here on the offense, and this comes courtesy of Sal Capaccio. And I'll read a tweet of Sal's, and then I'll give you a couple sentences from his article. Sal said, "The reports of Zach Moss's football death have been greatly exaggerated. He looks fresh and is getting plenty of opportunities." In his recap article, he said, "I like the way Zach Moss has looked over his first 4 days. He seems to be fresh and comfortable in the offense. Moss is still going to be a factor when it comes close to roster decisions and should certainly not be counted out to be on the final 53." Well, I don't envision Zach Moss not making the roster. I think that it will be Devin Singletary, James Cook, Zach Moss, and Tywan Jones as the 4 rostered running backs. If there's an injury, then there's kind of a spot for Duke Johnson. I don't really see a path for Duke Johnson to beat out Zach Moss. I think the Bills will predictively want to side with their draft pick, right? Their 3rd-round pick of only a couple of years ago. And certainly a player that we all were excited about when he was drafted. He just hasn't been an effective player. And whether that's been fumbles or missing holes, not running confidently, injuries, like there's been issues here. And I feel like we've had multiple off seasons now where there's been a lot of glowing reviews regarding Zach Moss coming out of camp. And we've had these debates, it feels like, for several off seasons now, when it was kind of a Devin Singletary, Zach Moss situation where a lot of people thought Zach Moss was going to be the focal point of the backfield. I don't think I ever fell into that. I've always kind of maintained that Devin Singletary has been the better player. But there's always kind of been this hype around Zach Moss. But I think everyone's kind of at the point where, like, okay, cool, that sounds great. He's looked good. We want to hear that. But wake me up when he does something meaningful in a game, and provides consistently good contributions to the Buffalo Bills football team. He's been underwhelming to this point. And that doesn't mean I'm not encouraged by Sal's report, but I do want to kind of have the right perspective when it comes to this, because his first 2 years, we had a lot of good training camp hype when it comes to Zach Moss. Now he's got to go out and prove it, because his first 2 seasons in the league, for a number of reasons, have been underwhelming. If you haven't tried Built Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? Delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite, cookie dough chunk puffs. They have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. All the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it, plus it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. Run to Built.com to snag a box for you and the family. It'll be the perfect treat, or you can find a really good hiding place and just hoard them for yourself. Like all Built Bars, the new cookie dough chunk puff is covered in 100% real chocolate. That means they're healthy and tasty. Chocolate-covered cookie dough with a light, fluffy texture. It is so good. I've had them. They're phenomenal. I'm not lying to you when I say I love eating these Built Bars. I love the puffs, and they sent me a sample of the cookie dough chunk puff, and it is awesome. Check it out for yourself. Go to Built.com. Use our promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your next order. Again, promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, let's talk about some of the defensive notes coming out of the Wednesday practice, day 4 of Buffalo Bills training camp. Obviously, the storyline, the big buzzy item coming out of camp has been, or at least on Wednesday, the offense woke up. Josh Allen toyed with the defense, lots of touchdown passes. Dawson Knox, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, the characters that you would expect were making plays, and Josh Allen was dealing. But there are some defensive takeaways that I want to get into, and we'll focus in on a couple of players here. Matt Marino, he noted another strong day from Ed Oliver, and we love hearing that, right? We're all excited about Ed Oliver, the growth that he demonstrated last year, and how he's going to improve this year with a guy like Von Miller playing alongside him and a deeper, better group of defensive tackles in the room. This is what Matt Marino said in his article. He said, Ed Oliver has been a force all week and is going to be a must-watch on Saturday when the pads come on. And it was fun. You saw some of the video coming out of training camp where, Ed Oliver took one of the camcorders that, I'm guessing somebody with the team or news station had on the field, and he's running around, taking video of Von Miller and just having a good time. Ed Oliver has this looseness about him, and I'm reminded of when I went and watched Ed Oliver play in college. He played at East Carolina. Houston came to East Carolina out in Greenville, and I made the 4-hour drive out there because I wanted to see Ed Oliver. I didn't know that he was going to be a Buffalo Bill, but I knew he was a big-time prospect. And as a draft scout, I wanted to go get an exposure with him and see what I could learn. And so I'm on the field at ECU, and waiting for Ed Oliver to come out and work out. And, my entire objective was to follow around Ed Oliver throughout the entire pregame and be around him as much as I could to just kind of get a vibe for him. And that's what Ed Oliver is. He is a juiced up guy. He came out dancing, a lot of hype, and you could see he's interacts with his teammates, just a lot of energy and juice that he brings. I mean, this guy was stretching and just flowing and dancing, having a good time. And it's good to see that, that guy at Houston, right, that was a big deal at Houston, and the way that he was, he gets drafted to the Bills. He's, entering, is this year 3 or 4 of his career? You could still see that same guy, back in Houston is showing up in Buffalo. To me, that signals a lot of comfort in who he is as a player. And obviously I'm excited to see the growth there. Matt Marino, as well as Sal Capaccio and John Scott, they noted some really good stuff for Siran Neal. Siran Neal with some really good reps, even against Stephon Diggs. Want to read a quick excerpt from John Scott's recap article. John Scott said this about Siran Neal. He said, Neal blanketed Diggs down the field during their lone one-on-one battle, with Neal knocking the ball out of Diggs' hands to prevent a would-be touchdown. The two were matched up again during red zone teamwork, with Neal leveraging the sideline very well, leading Diggs to make the catch but out of bounds. Neal is not often talked about in terms of his prowess in coverage, but I think he's done a very good job against the Bills' best on the outside early in camp. Siran Neal's a player that's always had a lot of interest from me. I enjoyed scouting him at Jacksonville State, where you saw a really physical player and a guy that just brought the fight on every snap, and he lined up all over the place. You'd see him at linebacker, you'd see him in the slot, you'd see him at safety, you'd see him out wide, and he just was one of those players that you say, look, get him on the field. He's a football player. He's going to be physical and aggressive. And that has translated very well to special teams so far in the NFL. We haven't really seen him get a consistent opportunity to play defense. There's been some issues when he's been on the field defensively, but there's also been some high-level flashes. And I've referenced this, and this will be now the second time this week that I reference it on the podcast, but one of the games that I recently went back and watched was the Bills against the Jaguars last year. I have a roster presentation due for the Draft Network on Jacksonville at the end of the week, so been spending time in their tape, and obviously I watched the Bills game. Well, Siran Neal played a little bit on defense in that game, and I thought he played really well. Some really instinctive plays in terms of pursuing the football, making tackles, but also some sticky reps in coverage. I feel like there's a reason Siran Neal hasn't gotten more opportunity defensively. Like, there's definitely a reason for that. But I feel like there's always been some good flashes. And I remember as a rookie, some really good blitzing opportunities, right, where he was able to time it up and, show that physicality and that urgency and some of that athleticism to make some plays. And as I continue to perceive that the Bills want to be a little bit more versatile on defense, based on some of the personnel that they've brought in, I can see them doing that with a guy like Siran Neal. And part of what you're seeing the NFL do defensively, a trend that is starting to creep up more and more, and you can see personnel-wise, you look at what the Patriots have done with their defensive personnel, the Colts, obviously the Panthers. You're seeing teams wanting to play more 3 safety looks and kind of use that slot safety type player. And Taron Johnson is the Bills slot corner, and he's phenomenal at what he does. But when you start to think about Terrell Bernard as that overhang player, Siran Neal and how you can move around him and use him for some specific matchups, I get excited about the versatility that the Bills can offer with their personnel groupings to be more matchup specific. And not just be, hey, the same 11 guys are always on the field. Rotation up front of the D-line, but your back 7 is always the same guys. I think that's a nice way for this Bills defensive scheme to evolve, is by becoming more matchup specific with your back 7 defenders. And if you introduce skill sets like Terrell Bernard, like Siran Neal, heck, even a Jaquan Johnson, you can do more and be a little less predictable with how you're going to play, because you can do more by presenting more skill sets and new challenges to the opposing offense. It intrigues me a lot. And, Siran Neal signed that, it was a 3-year extension. He's paid pretty well. And obviously his bread and butter is going to be special teams as a special teams ace for this football team. But if you can get a little bit more out of him on defense, that's a good thing. And obviously you want to have guys that can step in and provide good depth, right? I don't want to live in a world where Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer gets injured or the Bills have more injuries at corner. But having a guy like this kind of primed and ready to go is a very good thing. Two final notes here on this defensive recap from the Wednesday practice. More positive praise for Cam Lewis. It sounds like he's going to really force the issue here when it comes to making this roster. It's a good problem to have. A lot of defensive backs are playing well. And then the last thing is something that I've found really fun to kind of follow throughout the first few days of camp. It's that these battles between Kaiir Elam and Stephon Diggs are becoming more and more heated. And early on, you kind of got this impression from reports that Stephon Diggs was kind of having his way with the rookie, which you would expect. But it really seems like Kaiir Elam is not just going to take it, right? He's rising to the occasion. He's challenging one of the best wide receivers in the game in practice. And that is only going to make Kaiir Elam better. And it sounds like they're getting a little wordy and talking a little trash. And, Kair's being a little bit more physical and assertive with Steph. I love hearing that. That's only going to make Kaiir better. And obviously, I think, as a leader for the football team, I think Stephon Diggs certainly understands his role in terms of making sure that he's providing good looks and challenging, these young players because, it ain't going to get any easier in week one. Cooper Kupp just had like 2,000 yards receiving. Kaiir Elam's probably going to have some matchups against him. Well, what better way to get you ready for that matchup than going up against a Stephon Diggs every single day in practice? Let's close things out by looking at some of the comments that Ken Dorsey made during his press conference before the practice on Wednesday. And I've been excited to hear from Ken Dorsey, right? We're still kind of getting to know him as the offensive coordinator. And anytime that he speaks, I'm pretty dialed in because I want to see what nuggets I can get and learn more about him and what I think he's going to be like as an offensive coordinator. And, the first question he was asked about was yards after catch. And, this is something that I've been talking about for a few years now. I've mentioned it 1,000 times. It seems like Josh Allen dead last in the NFL in yards after catch per completion. Dead last. I mean, he's down there with Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Davis Mills, Daniel Jones. Not where you want to be. And we know that part of the reasons for the poor yards after catch is scheme and the types of routes that the Bills run. It's ball placement from Josh Allen. And I think a little bit of it is some of the skill sets that the Bills have had at receiver and tight end and running back that haven't really been the best in terms of guys that are good at producing after the catch. I was watching that Jaguars game, and you saw some opportunities that Cole Beasley had to make guys miss in space, and he couldn't do it. Andrew Wingard, safety for the Jaguars, Cole had space to set him up, and he just got tackled. There's reps like that throughout that Jaguars game where I was like, there it is. There's the yak. There's the missed opportunities. So what did Ken Dorsey say about yak? He said, we've talked about that since day one of the players coming in. Will be a constant focus for us. Goes back to how we want to play. We want to play fast with speed, finishing runs, and getting the football into the hands of our weapons and being explosive. We want to be physical and finish runs, split defenders, and compete for extra yards. We need our guys to be in the right spots and have good ball location. He knows. There are such obvious ways for this offense that's been elite. Like, let's not lose perspective here. The Bills' offense has been elite over the last 2 years. And I think that's what makes it very easy to identify those low-hanging fruit opportunities to get better as an offense. And look, I love the high-level runs and throws that we see from Josh Allen. I love that. But James Cook on a Texas route where he catches the ball 2 yards beyond the line of scrimmage and then runs for another 8, 9, 10 yards, I like that too. And I want to see more of that. I want to see more cheap production, for lack of better phrasing, to go with all the high-level stuff that this offense does. Ken Dorsey was asked about O.J. Howard, and Ken was choosy here with how he answered this question because he didn't want to say that OJ Howard was struggling to come along, but he said, look, we're trying to maximize our personnel groupings, not rely on any one guy in the offense. And as he becomes more comfortable, he's going to play faster and more confident. So it wasn't this glowing review. Like I've talked a lot here recently on the podcast about noticing how coaches respond when they're asked about specific players and what do they go with, right? Do they start talking about their habits and their work ethic and what they can do, or do they kind of go in a different direction? And Ken went in a different direction here with OJ Howard and didn't really make it about OJ Howard and said, look, we're trying different personnel groupings. We don't want to rely on any one guy, and he'll become more comfortable as we learn more about him and he starts to play faster and more confident. So as far as the OJ Howard thing goes and our excitement about more 2 and 3 tight end sets, it's a work in progress. Conceptually, it's a great idea, but the Bills have to have trust, right, in the options to put on the field. And so we'll see how this evolves. But these tight ends are something that I'm definitely dialed into and paying attention to moving forward. On Gabriel Davis, man, just another glowing response when it comes to the Bills and Gabriel Davis. This is what Ken Dorsey said. There was an obvious talent when watching him in college, but you never know how it's going to translate in the NFL. You never know how their skills are going to blossom at the next level. A lot of times it's up to that player from a mental standpoint and how hard they are going to work. There's not many guys that you draft at receiver that aren't going to have the right physical tools. It's can they handle the mental load and how hard are they going to work? Gabe has both of those at an extremely high level. Great mentally, as smart as any wide receiver I've ever been around, and he works his tail off. He's going to continue to improve because he's never complacent. Amazing response. And I take a lot away from this. Obviously, first and foremost, what he said about Gabriel Davis and what it takes for receivers to be good at the next level and how Gabriel Davis has those qualities. But also, as an evaluator of talent, wide receivers can be a tricky position because you watch college football and you see a lot of receivers making a lot of plays, and you start to ask yourself questions about how does that translate to the next level, and are they going to be good? You know, you're seeing these guys catch 90, 100 balls, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, but it doesn't mean they're going to be a productive NFL receiver. So what is it that happens when they get to the next level that takes a leading receiver for a good college offense and makes them, just another guy at the next level? I think about a guy like Anthony Johnson at the University of Buffalo. I didn't care for his tape in college, but you can't deny the production that he had. Well, he has not delivered anything meaningful in the NFL. Productive player in college, but why hasn't he been better at the next level? Why hasn't he really even had a chance to be good in the NFL? Well, I think Ken Dorsey shed some good light on what it takes. It's mental, right? There's a lot that you have to think about as a wide receiver. It's not just about being athletic and being able to catch a football. It's can you process coverage? Do you know how to get open both from a route running perspective and separation quickness, but also how to adjust your routes to coverage? Are they playing off? Are they playing press coverage? How are they rotating the coverage, right? How are you going to get open? And then, of course, the work ethic component. Sounds like Gabe Davis has all the goods. Last thing I'll get into is what Ken Dorsey said about James Cook. Dorsey said he's working and doing a great job of doing what we're asking him to do. It's hard for rookies to make an impact in year one. We want to continue growing with him and learning what he can do physically. It's too early to tell where he's going to fit in, but I love James. I love his personality. I love what he brings to the table athletically and physically, and he's working his tail off mentally. Felt like Ken Dorsey was being a little bit cautious with that response. We can tell based on the reports that this dude's going to have himself a role in this offense. And sure, there's things for him to learn, and he's got to onboard. He's got to get everything down. There is a lot that you have to do as a running back because you got to be able to run the football. You got to be able to pass block. You got to be able to catch the football. And, James Cook's going to be asked to line up in a lot of different spots as a receiver. There's a lot on his plate. I respect, what Ken Dorsey's getting at with that. Certainly seems like James Cook's going to be a really big part of this offense, and I'm excited for it because I think he can answer a lot of the questions about filling in the gaps on areas where this Bills offense can get better in terms of speed to the perimeter, outside run, the screen game, pass catching from running backs. James Cook can really, really help elevate the Bills offense in those critical areas. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. The Bills are off on Thursday, so there won't be a practice for us to recap, but we will talk Buffalo Bills football here on the show. Not sure if I'm going to do herd mentality or, I've been thinking about doing this show concept where I get a little gloomy, right? I've kind of painted a rosy picture all off season long for this football team, and I think that's justified. This is a good football team. I think collectively, most people would say it's a team that they expect to be a Super Bowl contender. Vegas certainly feels that way. You just saw the USA Today predicted the Bills to go 15-2. Like, this is a good football team. There's a lot of good to say, but maybe it's time to focus in on some of those areas where things are concerning and be really honest about some of the pitfalls that could come up this year that would prevent the Bills from achieving those goals. So I'm not sure if I'm going to do that or herd mentality, but either way, we're talking Bills football for you here tomorrow on the podcast. So don't miss it. Make sure you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.